Thank you, Marcus. So good afternoon and welcome to everyone. This very special webinar session that we wanted to do, known as the Future of Events. And I think it's come around really because there's a lot of concern and interest in what's going to happen to the events industry in the future. So myself, Fraser Chesterman, and Marcus Timpson, who many of you will know, both have run events in the past, have bought events, have sold events, and have launched events. And within the industry, we've been talking to a lot of people who have been saying, what's going to happen? Where are we going to go? What's the future look like? So we wanted to try and get a little group together to discuss this. And we have a fantastic panel today that I'd like to introduce you to, who come from different directions of the event space. And we hope will be able to give us some thoughts and considerations about what the world will look like post-COVID. So let me introduce everyone from the top. We have Nicola MacDonald, who some of you may know, former editor of Exhibition News and now specialising in event industry PR at Collaborative Creations. Nicola. Yeah. Thank you. We have Sylvia Blattner, Head of Marketing for Palexpo Geneva. As many of you will know, Geneva's premier exhibition centre, which holds events such as the International Motor Show, Vita Foods, Index, Invention Show, and most recently, an international tennis tournament with Roger Federer, the Laver Cup. So, hi to you, Sylvia.
Hi.
Then we have Graham Kennedy. Now, Graham has over 20 years' experience of exhibitions, but coming from the other direction, working for Ricoh and a number of other print manufacturers. He's been very much there when these organisations have been looking at exhibiting and where they go, where they make their choices and how they define what they do to deliver effective marketing for their organisations. He's currently heading up Ricoh's European industrial print business, which support technological developments in diverse markets ranging from embroidery to flooring to signage to biosciences. So he has a real experience of managing events and being the person that makes the decision for someone like Ricoh to go and attend. Hi to you, Graham.
Good afternoon.
So then we have Piers Byrne, entrepreneur and investor who's built and sold his own media businesses, worked on a number of M&A major corporates, both as CEO and as consultant. He's also the person that runs the Media Entrepreneur Group, which has around 150, 160 small, more, 180 small to medium size, over 200 now. Piers,
yeah, we just hit 220 last week.
That's fantastic, yeah. Small to medium size event and media businesses, aren't they? Who are part of that group?
90% are under 10 million in turnover.
Yeah, brilliant. And you also advise businesses on creating value and particularly preparing exhibition companies and media companies for preparation for sale. Is that right?
It's both. So we help with scale up and we help with corporate finance. Those two things sometimes go together, sometimes not.
Fantastic.
Very nice of you to invite me. Hello.
No problem. Thank you. And finally, we have Stephen Brooks, who many of you will know, who's formerly chairman of Mack Brooks Exhibitions Group, who were one of the largest privately owned exhibition organisers in Europe with over 45 trade shows, covering a range of industrial marketplaces. He has experience for many years, and after leading to a significant growth of that business, he recently sold that business to Reed. Hi, Stephen.
Good afternoon.
So we will start with Nicola, who has a few slides to share with us. Now, Nicola, over to you to tell us a little bit about the numbers.
Yeah, thanks, Fraser. So yeah, I've gathered together a few key numbers that we've had from various industry associations, including UFI, which is the Global Exhibitions Association in Visit Britain, and BVEP, which is the British Visits and Events Partnership as well, which was a survey. So I've got three kind of main points that I want to make out of these numbers. And first of all, obviously, it's quite a doom and gloom slide in some ways. There's a lot of money being lost in the industry. There's a lot of orders not being secured by exhibition companies. And secondary, this third point, 8.1 billion in economic output not generated by the industry. I think this is a really important point for the industry to be looking at in terms of our future recovery, because like many industries, we're not just losing money ourselves, but our customers are losing money, and cities and countries around the world are losing money because they're not receiving our business. And my last point, the 60% of event supplier base, it's really important for the industry that we support the event suppliers. And I think a lot of organisers and venues need to look at their event suppliers who are, a lot of them are in real danger due to this pandemic. And just looking at supporting those people and ensuring that the event cycle continues into the future. Next slide. So a lot of us kind of have some idea about what the event of the future of the soon future will look like once venues start to reopen. And a lot of this information has come from UFI's framework for reopening exhibitions and the NEC group's blueprint for returning to business. And number one, we have physical distancing, which will be queue control, 2-meter queues, physical partitions, booth controls and attendee numbers, limited attendee numbers. Health and safety will obviously play a big part with deep cleans, hand sanitizers, HVACs, and I think it's an important point for venues in particular to be very visible in how they're, increasing health and safety in their venues, being very open and communicative with their visitors and how they're reassuring visitors as they're starting to return to venues. And lastly, behavioural change will be internal with staff training and also customer communications, changing customer behaviour and how they attend events and pass through venues. So those are just a couple of slides to demonstrate some of the talking points that I think we'll be going through in this discussion today.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you very much for that. Really useful. It gives us a little bit of content to work on. So I want to start with this question that everyone's kind of thinking about at the moment, and everyone will have an opinion on this. So I really want to just get a voice from everyone. When do you think events will get back to that sort of normal footing, whereby exhibitors and visitors will be able to safely engage? And what will that new normal look like? So let's start with Stephen. Stephen.
Yeah, it's interesting because initially there were people postponing from sort of February, March through to June, and then people postponing through to September. And now I think it's looking even beyond that. But I guess the first, because we're all going to be speculating and talking about the future,
Yeah.
The first point to get in before anyone else does is that it really is unpredictable. I mean, my God, and it depends on the virus. And what this virus is going to decide to do to us all, we don't know. So there's a range of possibilities, of course, from the virus really going away at a point, not actually any longer being an issue, a current issue, just being a past trauma that people remember. There's that possibility right through to it getting worse. And there's everything in between, which I won't try and characterize. But my point is just to highlight the fact that it is very unpredictable. I think what you can say for sure is it will vary from country to country. I think you can also say for sure it will depend on media coverage, as well as the course of the virus. But in short, I right now expect events to be up and running by the beginning of 2001. We'll talk more about what that might look like in a while, I'm sure. But I think it might be sooner in some places and in some cases. But right now it feels like beginning of 2001.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Sorry, 2021.
It makes sense. Let's on that note of countries, let's just go to Sylvia. What's the feeling in Switzerland at the moment when you obviously you're hearing what organisers are saying and they're telling you when they want to start this again? And you've obviously got government intervention. What's the feeling from your point of view?
Well, as a venue, of course, we hope that we can start as soon as possible. If we could just get back in September would be great. To be honest, we still have two events in our 2020 calendar, and we really hope that we can hold our autumn fair in November this year. But maybe it's rather wishful thinking. We hope that we can start beginning of next year. This would be really important for us. But however, we think that once we can start again with our activity, it will be rather on a regional and on a national level, but not for international shows.
Yeah, that's been mentioned before. I think when we discussed this initially, there was a sense that local shows could potentially benefit from this, because obviously people won't want to travel quite so far. Piers, have you got a thought on this?
Yeah, well, I guess the question is deliberately provocative. And I think, you're saying events get back to a normal footing whereby exhibitors and visitors safely engage. Well, safely engaging is something that's controllable. Yep. Which exhibitors and which visitors isn't as controllable or predictable. And I sense there's a lot of, I've had my own trade show, I've sold it, I've invested in events businesses, I've been in this game for 25 years. I'd love it all to be normal. And for all the teams that I'm involved with, as an investor and advisor, to go, yeah, it's going to be January. What we're saying is plan for the long haul, plan for things to be really a series of abnormals for a really long time. So it doesn't matter really when the first shows happen in any particular country, because it's the nature of those shows that matters. So are they local, national, regional, international, as Sylvia and Stephen were saying? That's important. But also, whatever the event is, there will be people who aren't there, who aren't allowed to go, who don't feel safe to go. So if you live with somebody who's been immunocompromised, and you're a product sourcer, or you're key exhibition stand staff person or whatever, you may just not go. Yeah. So it's going to be abnormal. There's going to be a series of abnormalities. And there's one cognitive bias I'd like to point out, which is everybody's thinking recovery is going to go like this. Confidence is going to come back because that's how economic recessions work. It's not necessarily how epidemics or pandemics work. And so anybody who's not planning for things to get better and then potentially get worse again is possibly not thinking sufficiently about risk and resilience. Peter Gross has made a comment in the chat, which is quite interesting, which is the new normal will never come back, innovate or die, which is a sort of a quite dramatic way of saying what I'm saying.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, let's ask Graham, because obviously he's an exhibitor, and they would be a large scale exhibitor at a show like Drupa, and Rico will have a corporate view, and there is that sense that we could all be sitting here as exhibition organisers saying, well, we're ready to go. But the reality is, if someone like Rico said, well, actually, corporate travel, forget it, and running shows, forget it, going to shows, forget it. So, I mean, Graham, what's your thinking on this?
Yeah, well, I think there have been some really interesting points made, and like Stephen says, a lot of it is speculation. So everyone's going to have their own view, but certainly business travel, as has been said, is going to be a huge impact. Whether we're able to travel, whether we're able to travel safely, whether corporates like Rico, instigate travel bans to keep their staff safe. As Piers said, personal choice, personal fears will play into this as well. But I think when it comes to decision making from a corporate perspective, we're only going to be really, over and above keeping our staff safe, we're going to be looking at return on investment. So when do we take a risk on an event that might be planned for October or for January next year? Will that event go ahead? How will we be perceived by the market? Either if we attend, are we irresponsible by attending? Or if we don't attend, are we not being committed to our particular markets? So there's a huge catch-22 here, and without knowing, it's very difficult to make those decisions. So speculation is dangerous, but to some extent, there has to be a point where you have to base your decisions on the facts that are available now, and then take a calculated risk.
Yeah, and I guess what we're all trying to do is model what the future might look like. So, none of us know, we're only guessing, but it's just trying to work out what potential there is for new events. Nicola, your second slide mentioned kind of format. I wonder what you think the event format might look like in the future. You know, at the point everyone's been made, we'd love to get shows going again. There's no reason why we would, you know, outdoor shows might be the option. There's certainly things we can do to encourage people back into those environments. Your second slide mentioned a few of them. Have you got thoughts on what that format will look like?
Yeah, I think outdoor events are obviously going to have to take precedent just from a health and safety point of view. And I think when you're looking at the new normal, we're all kind of being quite negative about what that might mean in practice. But a lot of people have been finding a silver lining that new normal might mean the industry's forced to innovate and forced to kind of change some of the, you know, the bits that weren't quite working. And I think format might come into that as well.
Sure. I think you're right.
Smaller events, more integration of digital, more kind of smaller breakout sessions, even that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Sylvia, just out of curiosity, are Geneva Pell Expo looking at certain things that they can do to, you know, in terms of hygiene, in terms of distance, these sort of things? Are you looking at these at the moment?
Yes, of course, we're looking at it. It's a little bit difficult to put measures in place as long as we don't have the instructions from the Swiss authorities, because this will be what we are going to put in place. We're expecting, in fact, concrete measures by the end of the month, 27th of May, and this is something we will for sure put in place and in order to manage the venue. Yeah.
Okay. So previous to our discussions today, Stephen and I had a conversation around trade shows and the future of trade shows even before COVID, and there was a sense that we both had that the days of traditional shows, perhaps those big traditional blockbuster trade shows, those days possibly are numbered. Stephen, your thoughts on that? Because we were talking about the big shows, the mega shows.
Yeah, and I feel that it's somehow unconnected with COVID anyway. I think pre-COVID, you know, obviously over a long period, you can see how trade shows have changed. My company was very successful running, I suppose, what you call traditional trade shows, but you've got to define your terms and decide what you're talking about, of course. But in terms of the traditional type show that you might characterize as, you know, large scale machinery being driven to a venue and people being invited from all over the world and it taking place every 2 years. I mean, those events are extremely powerful and I don't see them disappearing quickly, but I think there's a generational issue without any doubt. They're long in the tooth. It's the baby boom generation that really value them most. I'm not so sure that younger people value them as much. And I think the demographics are already showing that. But I don't think those events, you know, suddenly disappear. They have a longevity like, you know, Wimbledon or the Olympics that puts them at a level that draws attention and keeps people going to them. But I think the point of them will diminish over time. A bit like, you know, department stores were generational or are generational. And you know, to imagine traditional trade shows around in 50 years, I would hesitate to believe they could be around in 50 years.
Yeah.
But in the next years, now the question now, of course, is whether COVID accelerates something or has an impact on that.
Exactly.
I'm not so sure it will actually. I think the effect on things like traditional trade shows is very gradual. I don't think there's anything.
Let's just start. I think Piers, you first had your hand, and then Graham.
No, Graham was first.
Fine, Graham.
Oh, thank you, Piers. I think the reasons we go to trade shows have changed, or certainly the visitors to our booths. Over the last 10 years or so, we see that the visitors have done their desk research beforehand. They've done all their research online, so they go to the show to prove that maybe they've reached the right conclusion in a particular piece of, you know, high value capital equipment. And I think in some ways, and I'll pick up on the point that Stephen just made about department stores, but it's kind of replicating the high street. The internet is having a massive impact on the events industry. So I think to an extent these mega shows and even maybe smaller shows need to make themselves more experiential, you know, like a Primark on the high street, where you go in, you don't just buy your buy your blouse or your shirt, but you go in and you can have a coffee. They've got an ice cream parlor. They're doing t-shirt printing. So it's an experience, and you spend 2 or 3 hours in the store. Now, perhaps the trade show needs to take a leaf out of.
So this is just
the
trend,
high
isn't it?
streets.
This
Yeah,
is just a
absolutely.
trend based on the fact that, you know, there's a new generation of people with a very different way of viewing things going through. Piers, you wanted to
I
say
don't think
something?
it's just generation. I think, you know, Stephen made the very good point that, you know, the most resilient of the old form of trade show, where there's big kit and long capex cycles, because it's very hard to replicate that experience of going and seeing the enormous machine that you're going to be running for the next 20 years. And because those purchasing cycles are so long. But I mean, what we're talking about is digital disruption. You know, 2 years ago, if you went to an exhibition organizers conference, and I went to a couple 2 years ago, 4 years ago, data and digital were treated as a marketing enabler or a customer service enabler. That's the whole discussion. There was nothing about digital transformation, digital disruption. And what COVID's doing is accelerating disruption in areas of the value proposition for different kinds of formats that are vulnerable to be done better online, or that are liable to be done better online. So Graham just eloquently talked about the product sourcing cycle. Well, how are people, if people are researching stuff online, they're also going to very sophisticated lead gen sites where they're taking people down a content funnel and helping them with their product sourcing journey. And then the exhibition is the end of it. Now, the exhibition survives in its current form because there's been a long bull market, so there hasn't been the need to examine those bits of spending. But if you look what happened to tech shows after 2001, you know, there's a long sort of slow decline in these mega tech shows, especially on the trade front. It's going to happen in other sectors. I think that's sort of inevitable. And therefore, as a trade show organizer, you've got to look at the different layers of value that you're providing and saying, which of those can and should we defend when live events come back in some sort of form? And which of them do we need to start thinking about providing in some other form, i.e. mainly digitally or in smaller event formats, or else someone else is going to do it. And one thing we know about digital disruption is, you know, the largest real estate company in the world doesn't own any property. The largest automotive transport company in the world doesn't own any cars. Like, it's not going to look like yesterday. And I think it's that looking at customer value and audience value and saying, is the show the best and only way to deliver value to that segment, rather than going, we hold the hammer, which is we organize big shows and therefore everything looks like a nail, bang, 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 bang. Those days are gone. Right? And all COVID's done is accelerated that in some of the sectors that were more insulated from it than before.
Okay. Piers, thank you. Stephen, I know you've got your hand up. I'll ask you, and then I would like to get Nicola involved on this. So, Stephen, quickly.
It's not a terribly quick point. I was just going to comment on some of that.
Okay.
I can.
Go on, say. Go on, say.
Okay. Well, I was just going to say, the good news is, from an event organising point of view, is that events are very adaptable. The complication we have now is we've somehow got to adapt to COVID, whatever that means, we don't know. We need a new model. But in any case, there's a long-term trend going on of the kind of events that are needed in the future relative to what was in the past. And we've kind of got to adapt for that as well. So it's complicated. But the great news is that, you know, putting together events, it's easy to adapt them. Of course, you can't overlook the fact, though, that those big traditional shows you're talking of are not adaptable. It's very difficult to adapt those things. You've got this huge financial prerogative to keep churning them out. Everyone knows them from last time. They've all got a freeze frame image of what the event is from the previous event. So you can't reinvent it in their minds anyway, very readily. And you just keep plowing along. And, you know, that's going to continue without any doubt. But at the same time, the ability and the opportunity, I think, for people that know what they're doing to adapt, to innovate, and to run events that really hit the sweet spot, whatever that might be. I wouldn't even dare to get into it. But,
okay, let's pick up on that.
That's the future for events.
Let's pick up on that, because obviously, whilst this COVID crisis has been going on, there's been a lot of people, I use the term that's been used a lot, pivoting to take themselves from their live event and transfer that into a virtual environment. And I want to ask, Nicola, obviously this is going on at the moment. Do you sense there's a place for virtual events?
I just want to add something to the previous point about these large kind of blockbuster events, which I think in the age of COVID, people don't want to walk up and down the NEC all day. They want a curated experience, and that kind of does come into the virtual conversation, which is, we're all a little bit sick of virtual events probably by this point, and we're a bit skeptical about how they might carry on after the COVID lockdown. But I think, integrating virtual more seamlessly into the live event is the future.
So you're kind of talking hybrid version or mixture of, or one brand that has both virtual and live versions?
I think live events making more out of the possibilities of virtual. There's still a lot of events in this industry that happen on 2 or 3 days, and they're in their kind of bubble, and then they finish, and it's about extending the event 365, and I know we're all sick of that as well, but it's about, making kind of bespoke curated content for visitors. Yeah.
Now, I guess looking at the group that we've got, you are the youngest in the group. The whole thing about the exhibition industry, dare I say, just.
Yeah, pretty sure.
Yeah, the whole thing about the exhibition industry, particularly in the UK, but actually probably in Europe and in the rest of the world, is it's quite an older generation industry. And the challenge, I guess, for us as exhibition organisers from a few years gone by is that virtual events is being defined by a digital generation, not by an exhibition organising company. So actually we're exhibition organisers that are used to live events, but actual virtual events are being defined much more by a digital generation, a generation that's more Nicola's age than our age. Does that pose a challenge for us?
No, I think people of any age can deal with the situation. The fact that it's generational doesn't make it about age, strictly speaking. I think the two things get confused. People of any age are quite capable of reinventing and understanding, and by the way, people at a very young age are quite capable of being very conservative.
No, sorry, Stephen, you're not understanding what I'm saying.
So
sorry, Stephen, you're not understanding what I'm saying. What we're noticing is that the people who are developing the technology for virtual events typically are not of our generation, and they're not typically exhibition organisers. They're digital content.
Tech community people.
They're tech community. So we're being challenged by that in a different way.
And they also don't follow the same event rules that perhaps we culturally do.
Yeah. No, okay. No, that point I definitely
makes
follow.
sense.
So, in fact, I would go as far as to say that a virtual event, there is no such thing. I mean, it's not an event. So that's all there is to it. The fact is that digital facility gives so much potential. There's so much there anyway. There's going to be so much more. And it is a distraction to talk about virtual events because you need to label it differently, really.
Great.
In the sense that you're not trying to create an event online. You can't have an event online. The events are face-to-face.
Graham, let me ask you, as someone who would be spending money in marketing and wants to get to market, what's your view of going forward from this?
Oh, well, I'd just pick up on 2 points there. First Fraser. Stephen just said events are face-to-face. And Nicola said, made a comment that we're sick of virtual events already. Well, actually, we recently launched a new product into the market. We were expecting that we could have done that in one of our factories or at an event. We held a virtual event in Russia with 140 indirect dealer partners, with a live link via this same Zoom platform to our factory in Telford, and did a live demonstration to over 140 partners. Yes, I agree. We might be sick of virtual events at the moment because they're being forced down our throat at a very fast pace. But actually, the cost of putting that event on was insignificant. And we brought the content together in just a couple of days. So actually, from an exhibitor's perspective, or for someone who wants to get a message out to the market, it was extremely effective. And absolutely, I would do it again.
Yep. Piers?
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting. Thanks for that, Graham. It's a really eloquent way to cover it. Jim Curry in the audience asked a question about would an investor put money into a virtual events only play? And to me, of course, it's about the business plan and the management team. But a virtual event is kind of a confusing term because they're sort of the standalone, can we replicate the experience of all aspects of a large international trade show? Yes, you can from a platform point of view. Is it the same from a value point of view? Maybe I'm a little cynical about that. But then there's, Nicola's talked about hybridization. So if you've got a show that's got a significant digital audience and you don't have a hybrid element, that's probably an error. But the other thing that we're not talking about, we're talking about the future of events, but events are just a medium. You know, they perform some of the functions of a trade association, some of the functions of, you know, publishing, and then they've got their own magic, right? We all love live events. That's why we're on the call. But a virtual event is part of a digital marketing campaign, which may or may not have a face-to-face spike in it. So if you're just thinking about your exhibition in terms of, oh, we own exhibitions, so it's about the exhibition. It's not, because we all know that our clients go out and spend money in related publications, whether we own them or not, and other channels to market and their own events all around before and after our shows. We just don't happen to make any money out of it. What this disruption is doing is inviting us to have a look at what role we might play as organizers in that digital bell curve before and after our show. And virtual is just one aspect of that larger digital noise and marketing noise pre and post show. And again, I think that this sort of, if you're holding a hammer, everything looks like a nail. The fact that we happen just to bill people for stand space, and sometimes the visitors as well, doesn't mean that's what the show means to the industry. You know, when we did the rehearsal call, Graham was talking about the planning cycle, how far in advance you think about a trade show. But of course, you're not just thinking about how do I put the stand up and who do I put on the stand. You're thinking about all your activities and your messaging and your product launch around it. And so I think you just got to look at that whole ecosystem and say, what does digital mean for that? And what role can we and should we play in that? So it's not just about events.
Sylvia,
My view.
Sorry, go on. Nicola, go on, please.
No, I was just going to say, I think it's interesting talking about the events industry and running virtual events, because one thing I've been aware of in lockdown is that a lot of event organizers are running virtual events, but there's a conversation and a kind of
Okay.
But there's a difficulty and kind of an awkwardness around monetizing it. I don't know if a lot of people in the events industry themselves don't believe it has value, but there's this conversation about, can I really get my audience to pay for this? And I think that's like a mental.
It's a very good question, actually, and it's there's a couple of questions mentioning that this monetization of the virtual events. Piers, do you have people within your media entrepreneur group who've actually been able to monetize virtual events?
There are, yes. I mean, bear in mind, the first people to do this are conference organizers. So the barriers to entry are lower, and you've got audiences that are used to paying more for content. And we're seeing a factor of something like a 50% drop so you're talking about the delegate side of things. From an exhibitor and a sponsor point of view, people are just really testing that now, because the first wave of virtual events, and we are sort of mixing up virtual events and webinars, which are sort of different in my opinion. Mm-hmm. The first wave of those are about mitigating and protecting exhibitor bases. And what some of us are trying to do is to habituate clients like Graham to the delivery of digital lead gen solutions across, you know, not just digital actually, but across face-to-face, virtual events, lead gen campaigns, so that we can then convert our liabilities into value for clients, or at least keep them happy while we're going ahead. So I don't think anybody's really tested it, because we're in the switching period. Yeah. But there are certainly people who are gearing up to do it. And I'll give you two stats from a survey we just ran. So, and bear in mind, these are owner-managed businesses, mainly under 10 million quid turnover. 50% of them are planning to pivot their business model fundamentally, not necessarily to virtual, but to invest in new products. And in fact, new products is the number 2 priority within that group, which in some ways is counterintuitive, because you might just think, right, let's batten down the hatches, protect our customer groups, and make sure we ride this out, which is maybe what a corporate needs to do.
Is that the type of companies that you're talking about? Because that's, you know, there's a comparison between the big corporates and the small to medium-sized entrepreneurs. They always tend to be a bit quicker to respond to things, and typically your group are like that, aren't they? So they're in that position to be able to make the move.
Yeah. And the question is whether they're doing it because they have to, because they've got less cash, or whether they're doing it because they're innovative. And it's
a bit of both, probably, isn't it?
I suspect it's a little bit of both.
A bit of both, of course. Was there just as we finish off on this bit, there's a few questions that have come up, and a few people are saying, you know, virtual events, where, who, what. Is there any recommendation? Would you be directing people who are listening to a particular set of technology? You know, is it Hey Summit? Is it Zoom? Is it Remo? What are you hearing at the moment?
Who are you asking?
You, Piers. Sorry.
Oh, right, yeah. So, well, we always say, make sure you've got your value proposition right first. So, yes, I mean, so a lot of people are using Hey Summit, but it's still in a sort of live development type process. There are more kind of, you know, all singing, all dancing solutions like iVent, which has been, you know, they closed their books to new applications about a month ago, I think. And then if you've got a simpler format, then, you know, we're trialing out Remo on our next meetup in June, because the online networking suits our type of very quick moving entrepreneur community. Yep. But it's not about the platform, it's about the value prop. And the value prop is not usually just about doing a virtual event. And you only know it if you go and ask your customers what they're thinking and what they want now. And you ask the same question of your audience. And most people are going, tech stack, tech stack, tech stack. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? Well, that's all very well, but that's the second set of questions that you should be asking. So that's just one caveat.
Okay, we've got a couple of areas we want to cover off. One, which is saleability of events and the value of events and buying and selling at this point. I want to cover that in a moment. Just before that, there's been quite a lot of talk within the exhibition industry. You know, mass media have been talking about it. This sense that the national governments, particularly in the UK, have they recognised the importance of events to national economies, and are they doing enough? Is that, you know, do you sense that we're getting the support for the events industry that we need? Anyone want to pick up on that? Stephen, do you want to give us a comment?
Well, I mean, the UK certainly not. It tends to be the case in smaller countries. They get just about the bandwidth for events, and so some countries are better at it than others. There are some exceptions. Germany's always been very good at understanding its events industry. As I say, the UK isn't particularly. It varies very much from country to country, and in fact, perhaps anyway, the broad brush support is, you know, the generic support across all industries is the most important aspect of what's gone on in the UK. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sylvia, what are the Swiss government doing to support the exhibition industry?
It depends a little bit on the event. You might have heard that we could get the credit from the Geneva state for the Geneva Motor Show. They were talking about that. The decision is not taken yet, but obviously Geneva cares about the events that take place in our state, in our canton. So I mean, they know that it is important, that event management is important.
Yeah, there's a sense, I think, from the industry that maybe the government are not supporting the events industry as much as it was. I think Nicola's point right at the beginning of some of those slides, that there was a sort of, you know, it's a massive industry, the events industry, particularly in the UK, it's huge. Nicola?
I think a lot of what mass media have been arguing is that government kind of puts all live events into the same pot. And that, you know, I've myself been at meetings at Westminster when they've talked about trade shows in the same breath as the Olympics and, you know, artists at the O2.
Yeah.
And I think what would be good would be kind of a compartmentalization of the events industry in the same way that I think is happening in Germany when they're specifying trade shows are distinct from mass gatherings and have different purposes. Yeah.
Any other comments on this?
Yeah, maybe whether the support is there, I don't know, Fraser. I don't perhaps move in the exhibition circles as much as the rest, but certainly I don't see the due credit for the exhibition industry in the current climate. You know, what venues are doing in terms of making themselves available for the field hospitals, shell scheme electrical contractors, you know, providing their services to build these facilities. I certainly haven't seen the credit where it's due for the event industry in that respect.
Yeah, there was a sense after post-World War II that the exhibition industry, particularly in Germany, was, you know, at the heart of encouraging business to take place again. And I guess, you know, post this situation, perhaps the events industry could be very much part of that, but who knows? Let me ask, I want to get into a little bit of the nitty-gritty of saleability and the value of events. Obviously, this has hit the events industry very, very hard. Piers, what's your view on the situation after COVID?
Well, my view is, and bear in mind, we only work with owner-managed businesses, so I can piss off corporates if I want, within reason. If you're selling your business now with the level of uncertainty, or taking investment, the level of uncertainty that's out there, you're going to get a suboptimal deal, or no deal at all, and you'll waste a lot of time on it. And so, you know, we ran a webinar on this recently, and whilst we make money from corporate finance, we put it 8th out of 9 options in terms of selling your business today, with insolvency being the 9th. Because it's not great to make decisions when you're under stress and when you're in a rush. And that's not to say that there aren't both enlightened and unenlightened people going out looking for deals at the moment. There are individuals who've got potential private equity backing who can make investments or acquisitions or management buy-ins. There are some more enlightened people who are looking to take minority stakes where cash is required for working capital reasons. And there are others who are working with kind of, I'm not so keen on this, but with earn-in structures where you'd still do the deal, but it's much more backloaded. But it's not going to be a great deal. It's not going to be like, we always look for a win-win deal. It's going to be one that you're much more likely to regret as a seller today, and therefore you need to do it when you've exhausted all other options. With one caveat: there may be somebody who's in your sector who you trust and whom you know, and who can add value to your business, so that 1 + 1 does equal 3. But if if they don't follow those characteristics, I'd think really long and hard before entering into a conversation. It's going to be, how are they going to make their ROI calculation? It's got to be based on something super, super conservative, and therefore more likely than not, less than what is going to happen.
Of course. Sylvia, you're a venue, you wanting to get new events into your venue, of course. So how as a venue would you support? Would you help? What would you do to try and encourage people to launch, people to
at least to keep the our traditional events? Yes, of course. I think we need to be extremely flexible in terms of calendar first, not to penalize our current customers. Then we are also thinking about for example, supplementary space you will need once you will organize your event. Maybe for health reasons you need larger aisles, and this means that you need more space, and this is something, I mean, we will of course offer without any extra cost. We talked about more days if you want to attend the same number of visitors. Maybe you need 2 or 3 days more for your exhibition, and this is also something we could offer. So we will of course put everything in place in order to be rather a partner than just a building. Yeah,
okay. So Stephen, you're a man who's got some money to spend on investing at the moment. Is the time good to invest in a new show?
To invest? Well, it's worth
in a new show.
saying that the buying and selling of shows is a bit of a minority interest from an organiser's point of view. Some shows are never bought and sold, of course. But yeah, in the 20, 30 years I've been in the business, that has come about for a segment of the industry. I agree very much with Piers. There's going to be, and there is, a complete impasse for a period. But eventually people will want to sell. And it's what drives innovation in the industry. At the end of the day, people take those risks, and you can lose fortunes on trying to make events work for all sorts of reasons outside your control. We've just seen COVID, so we don't need to be reminded of that. Therefore, the possible future reward of there being value in that goodwill, in that the ownership of that brand is a very important thing. Undoubtedly, in my view, it's been a bubble and it's been waiting to burst. And God only knows it hasn't burst now.
Yep.
I don't know when it's going to burst. But the fact is, PE has pushed so much money through organising without, in my view, improving events to any great extent, without improving structures or anything, just critical mass. There's been an ongoing idea that if you put a bunch of shows together and have a bigger business, you can sell it for a bigger multiple. And indeed you could, because you'll find another PE company investing somebody else's money that's willing to do that. So for 25 years, we've seen this bubble gradually expanding, driven by executive incentive schemes, driven by QE as much as anything, and of course low interest rates. And it's been great, and it's driven a lot of the industry and the innovation in the industry. And if it is a bubble that's now bursting, we shouldn't be surprised, because you know, there's the events have been bought and sold on a few years later for more money without any real justification, except that you've got this ongoing acceleration. So that's going to be a problem. And Piers said it in much a shorter frame than I would, but there's going to be a huge impulse
as expected,
while buyers and sellers get their heads together about what they do.
Stephen, I just
want to. It doesn't make sense to pay the kind of multiples we're seeing from an investor.
No, of course not.
It doesn't make sense.
So as a potential investor, what would you be looking for today?
Well, it's about creativity for the future. It's about funding people, funding events, funding situations that you believe in for the future. Because, you know, events are adaptable, they do grow. If you get it right, if you hit sweet spots, you can find yourself, you know, doing well.
Yeah.
But there are lots of risks associated with it. So, you know, it's not something that I think.
So nothing's really changed, is it? Nothing's really changed. You're still looking for the same things.
In terms of buying and selling shows,
you're still looking for the same things.
I think it's been completely interrupted. And I don't see PE companies taking the same aggressive approach to our industry in the future. We've kind of persuaded.
I will come to
persuaded financial engineering organisations that we're a recession-proof industry, and nobody's going to think that again. You know, the fear of infection and the concern about possible interruption to events isn't going to go away. I mean, it's been mentioned from an exhibitor point of view, the fear of booking stand, paying in advance when you're not sure if it's going to take place. The fear of attendees not coming because there's an outbreak of something or other in the local area. And, you know, PE companies are going to want to keep backing acquisitions because they have to invest their third-party money. But they have a lot of options in industries that have not been hit as hard as hospitality.
Fair comment.
And we've been put at the forefront of you know, of a perfect storm, the like of which we've never seen, sad to say.
Okay.
It's going to take time for an adjustment.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you very much. Stephen, if I could just ask Piers, because I know he's keen to get his voice in there.
Yeah, just to pick up on what Stephen said, really, I think, you know, the characteristics of a standalone events business are great when the market's good, because, you know, if you're a private equity company, you can reuse the cash flow from rebooks. Of course, when things go badly, that means that your solvency position looks very, very different. But I would say that what are the models that I would invest in? I'm a shareholder in 3 businesses, and where we've got hybridized brands, existing hybridized brands, because we do digital lead gen, I'm pretty relaxed. Where we're having to pivot into that and make the case for it, I'm a lot less relaxed, and I've lost a little bit of sleep over it. So there's a hybridization and a recurring revenue model that doesn't necessarily rely on a single point in time, which is the annual rebook. So if I were advising a private equity fund, and I'm never going to do that, because not the enemy, but they're always on the other side of the table, I'd be saying, look at hybrid models, because if you've got a way to re-engage with your audience and to bill your clients, irrespective of what's happening in the face-to-face environment, you've got resilience, you've got a higher share of wallet, you've got higher market share, and you've got more thought leadership. All of those things are barriers to entry and make your business more resilient. So I think that's what I mean about disruption. You just thinking face to face, in my opinion, is something that is going to become more and more of a niche pursuit. And I think that's sort of an extension of what Stephen said at the beginning of the webinar.
Yeah. Okay, Nicola, did you want to add anything to that? Any thoughts?
My kind of interest in the launching side is related to the conversation we've been having about these big blockbuster international events versus more local audiences.
Yeah.
I don't know whether some of these big events might come back in more of a national format, or if maybe there'll be some competition launching, if anyone's brave enough to launch right now, with a more local, you know, curated show compared to one of these big events.
Yeah. I get a sense, it'd be interesting to hear Graham's thought on this, that, you know, within, say, for example, the print industry, there's FESPA in October and then Drupa in April next year. Will these events, these blockbuster events, will they take place? And will they be the same as they were?
There's some poll results as well that from the session that you can have a look at a certain point.
Thanks, Marcus. Graham.
Well, speculation again, Fraser. But you know, I'll come back to the point that a lot of these shows, you know, we build we have our R&D cycles tuned to the calendar. Yeah. So in many respects, you know, we need to be there because we need a platform to promote our new products. If they don't go ahead or if they're rescheduled, we will find another vehicle. We won't wait. And I think the proof will be how successful are those new mediums. You know, whether that be a webinar, whether that be a virtual event, or whether it be another platform, bringing customers to our own factory or facility, and that remains to be seen. But I think in the short term, absolutely, those shows will still go ahead, but they will change. They will change significantly.
So you don't see them being in the same format as they are at the moment?
No. I think maybe this generational element that we've been talking about will keep them in the same format for the short term, but absolutely they have to change to meet the needs of a changing marketplace. So
the threat to us as exhibition organisers is the changing marketplace, not the fact that you are testing other mechanisms for getting to market.
I think the threat will be the reasons for going to an event, whether that be an exhibition or whether that be a conference. I think what we've seen over the last few weeks and months is remote working, you know, changing our view of the future. You know, my sales team will tell me that there is no substitute for face-to-face contact. But actually, remote working, all of the remote working enablement tools that we have at our disposal today, you know, we have face-to-face contact. We're doing it here on this platform today. So how will people use these new tools that we're being forced to use, you know, for contact, for collaboration, for information sharing, for education, and many other things. You know, we're being forced to use these, and I think much of the market will have their eyes opened to how they can use these cost and time effectively. So once you kind of position all of those different elements, why do you go to a show? What is the need for that trade show or that conference?
Okay, thank you. Marcus, you're there at the moment. Could you just share with us the results and numbers that we've got from the
we asked some questions. We asked when would things get back to normal footing whereby exhibitors and visitors safely engage, and 29% believe April 21. That's the largest number, followed by 21% when a vaccine is found. And there are the inevitable optimists, which is good. But yeah, so it's very split, to be fair, but it's looking like well after Christmas, and a significant number think actually, you know, when people will safely travel. I heard, for instance, earlier today that, for instance, HP have just said that there's a bar on business travel for the rest of the year, for instance. Now, in the print market, they're probably the largest single brand. So, you know, that's a significant fact, isn't it? The second question is, will virtual events continue to grow the current void left by the event cancellations? Yes, they will only perform, but they will only perform a temporary role, 20%. 45% think actually, yes, they will, but it will be complementary. It won't be instead of, it will be as well as. And again, that mirrors print really, because digital print in the analog world doesn't replace it, invariably plays a different role. And I think that's often the misconception with this argument, that is digital going to replace? No, it's doing new things. It does new things. The next question is, what event formats are most likely to suffer long term? And perhaps predictably, international trade shows really high, 71%. Festivals, 65%, that's proximity of people and density, I suppose. Consumer shows is high as well with international. So I guess, again, that's density of population, isn't it? And business travel. And
what was the lowest, Marcus? Marcus, what was the lowest?
It was international trade shows, 71%.
That was the highest. What was the lowest?
Sorry, the lowest, probably, let's have a look. Conferences, B2B conferences, national B2B conferences, national events, as you talked about localization, obviously are going to be much more appealing and less of a barrier to travel as well. And lastly, what role do you think events will play in the recovery? Only 7% said they'll play a leading role, and 48% think they will play a useful role.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was useful. Any comments to any of that, Stephen?
Yeah, one tiny point and then one bigger point that we haven't really got into, but it's very much connected with what Marcus has said. But the tiny point is that when you get less international attendance at shows, you will actually get more regional or national attendance. By definition, if people are travelling less, they're more able to visit local events if they're drawn to them. That's the tiny point. The bigger point, though, is one of recognising that the globalized world, the globalized physical world is really under threat. Internationality and globalization is really under threat. And COVID has really made that so apparent. It's a common disease, it's a common experience for people, but it's completely divided the world. And, you know, last 20, 30 years, events have really benefited from globalization, and participants at events have really benefited from that. Because you can go to new markets with an established brand, with your industry and your peers, and draw a local attendance and do good business. And, you know, it's from the point of view of events, not virtual events, but physical events, that's a big factor. Because globalization digitally, I don't think slowing down or going to slow down, funny. Although we keep hearing politically that the world is, you know, there's a reversal of globalization. I don't think that can happen digitally in the same way. It's a physical thing. So I'm not really trying to make a point that either agrees or disagrees with anything anyone said, but it's that what's happening to globalization is a big issue. It's a big issue for us.
Isn't it? It's globalization. Does anyone want to add to that? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was just going to say it's part of the sustainability argument as well.
Yeah.
If you're having, you know, effective national events with more integration of digital, then you've got this international audience that's still participating, but maybe not in the room. And it is a more sustainable way to go. Yes.
And travel obviously is one of those issues, isn't it? That, you know, air travel, obviously people are concerned about that. Piers, did you want to say anything there?
Well, sustainability, I mean, from a client's point of view, you'd think that there's going to come a time where events are the medium of last resort in some sectors, because you know, I know a lot of work's been done by the AO and others in terms of sustainability, but we should think about it. You know, we're all having a chance to look at the planet at the moment. And then there were some questions about, you know, thought process. There's a lot of questions, so there's one in there about innovation and thought process. And Fraser, you said something at the beginning, which is, you know, the exhibition industry is, you know, it's older and all this. Well, I think people who are currently running exhibition companies probably look like me and you know, but actually, if you look at people who are launching events businesses or people who are running them at one level below the C-suite, it's much more balanced in terms of gender and ethnicity. And we need that diverse thinking to create innovation. And it is a chance for us to stop being a bunch of white men with, you know, okay, it's great you've got 2 women on the call, but there's, you know, 7 of us. We have the same, it's like, we need to have a diversity of thought around this because the answers aren't what they were yesterday.
And that's the point I was trying to make, I guess, at the beginning, that we were kind of caught up in thinking that trade shows would be trade shows as we see them, and that this disruptive force of COVID has just made people, give them the opportunity for people to rethink it, relook at it, reconsider it. Because exactly as you said, a lot of launches that are occurring are coming from people who are perhaps in their mid-30s, not in their mid-50s. So, you know, that's the right approach, isn't it? And they will have a very different view of what that exhibition will look like or that event will look like than we would have had 20 years ago. exactly as we said, because, you know, historically trade shows were about large bits of technology and about putting people in front of them and touching, feeling, and doing all they needed to do with those products. So it's kind of a very different dynamic. Ladies, gentlemen, thank you very much. I think we're pretty much coming up to the end of the hour. So I would just like to say to all of you, Sylvia, Piers, Nicola, Graham, Stephen,
Thank you.
and Marcus, thank you to all of you. Very much appreciated. Hope it was useful. We've tried to bring in some of the questions from outside, although looking through them, a lot of the questions were very similar to the discussion points that we had. So I feel we've kind of covered off some, if not all, of the key issues we wanted to cover. So thank you to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fraser. Thank you all.